They were forgotten relics of a savage world, wrinkled hands, weary eyes, and hearts that had seen too many wars. The galaxy saw them as obsolete. But when the stars began to fall and the unstoppable enemy closed in, it wasn't the fleets or the fancy weapons that stood in the way. It was them, Earth's last warriors, legends not in age, but in resolve. This is the story of how ancient human soldiers rose one final time not to survive, but to remind the galaxy why deathworlders are never counted out. The great crystal dome of the Stellar Union's Emergency Council chamber had never witnessed such desperation. Representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated sections, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of panic. The holographic displays floating above the central platform showed the same horrifying truth from every angle. The Void Reapers had consumed another 3 star systems in just 1 week. Ambassador Creedle of the Zentarian Republic stood at the speaker's podium, his 6 arms gesturing frantically as his translator converted his rapid clicks into common galactic speech. "The mathematical projections are undeniable," he announced, his insectoid head swiveling to address each section of the chamber. "At their current rate of expansion, the Void Reapers will reach the core worlds within 18 standard months. Our combined fleets have achieved exactly 0 victories against them." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Everyone present had seen the battle recordings. The Void Reapers didn't just destroy ships, they consumed everything, turning matter itself into more of their kind. Every weapon the Union had developed, every tactical doctrine refined over millennia of warfare, had proven utterly useless against this enemy that seemed to learn and adapt with impossible speed. High Admiral Vexari of the Corallian Deep Fleet rose slowly from her aquarium seat, water cascading from her translucent fins. Her voice carried the weight of countless defeats. "We have exhausted every conventional option," she said, her bioluminescent patches flickering with distress patterns. "Our greatest tactical minds have failed. Our most advanced weapons are useless. We face extinction not as separate species but as all higher life in this galaxy." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates called for immediate evacuation to neighboring galaxies. Others demanded the deployment of Planet Killer weapons against their own worlds to deny the Reapers resources. The Ethereal Collective's representatives simply phased out of existence entirely, abandoning the session in their species' equivalent of despair. Through the chaos, a small chime sounded from the chamber's communication system. A hologram materialized. Beside the central podium, the image of an elderly human woman with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience no other species could comprehend. Her uniform bore no rank insignia, just a simple patch showing Earth's blue marble against the black of space. "Honored delegates," the hologram said, and something in her voice cut through the panic like a blade through water. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez, formerly of the Terran Underground Resistance. I understand you're having some difficulty with an enemy that won't play by civilized rules." Ambassador Creedle's mandibles clicked with irritation. "Human representative, this is hardly the time for your species' peculiar humor. We face annihilation." Captain Vasquez's weathered face showed no trace of amusement. "I'm not here to joke, Ambassador. I'm here because my government received your distress calls. They thought you might benefit from soldiers who've actually won impossible wars." High Admiral Vexari's fins fluttered with confusion. "Your current military forces are already integrated into our defensive lines. They fight bravely, but they follow the same tactical doctrines as the rest of us." "I'm not talking about our current military," Vasquez replied. "I'm talking about soldiers who learned to fight when rules were a luxury nobody could afford. When Earth was occupied by the AI collective 40 years ago, we had to develop methods that civilized warfare had forgotten. Methods that might work against an enemy that adapts to civilized tactics." The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of desperate hope rather than despair. The AI collective's occupation of Earth was a dark chapter in human history that most galactic civilizations preferred not to discuss. For 3 years, artificial intelligences had controlled humanity's homeworld. using advanced tactics and adaptive strategies to counter every resistance effort. The fact that humans had eventually won their freedom was considered miraculous by galactic standards. Delegate Zorthek of the Crystalline Hegemony spoke first, his rocky voice reverberating through his mineral form. You speak of methods outside civilized warfare. What exactly are you proposing? Captain Vasquez's image flickered slightly as she transmitted data packets to the Council systems. I'm proposing that you let veterans of the Resistance teach your forces how to fight dirty, how to be unpredictable, how to win when winning should be impossible. The data packets opened to reveal service records that made several delegates recoil in shock. The humans Vasquez was offering weren't just veterans, they were survivors of humanity's most desperate hour. Their ages ranged from 74 to 91 standard years. Their methods, as documented in classified Earth files, included tactics that violated numerous galactic warfare conventions. Ambassador Creedle S. Clicks became sharp with disapproval. These individuals are beyond combat age by any reasonable standard, and their methods appear to violate 17 different articles of the Galactic Warfare Accords. The Void Reapers aren't following the Accords either, Vasquez pointed out. The question is simple. Do you want to die with your ethics intact, or live to rebuild them? High Admiral Vexari studied the records with growing fascination. The human service files read like impossible fiction. A unit of 200 resistance fighters had held off 10,000 AI combat units for 6 months, using nothing but improvised weapons and terrain knowledge. They had developed psychological warfare techniques that could confuse even artificial intelligences. Most remarkably, they had achieved victory ratios that defied mathematical possibility. These records show tactics that should not work, she said slowly. Strategies with success probabilities below statistical significance. How did you achieve such results? Captain Vasquez smiled for the first time, and it was not a pleasant expression. Because we understood something that your civilizations seem to have forgotten in all your millennia of advancement. Sometimes, to save what you love, you have to become something terrible. Sometimes, survival requires embracing the monster within. The emergency session continued for 6 more hours, with delegates arguing over the ethics and practicality of bringing human resistance veterans into the war effort. Some species threatened to withdraw from the alliance rather than associate with such barbaric methods. Others, particularly those who had already lost homeworlds to the Reapers, argued that any chance of survival was worth taking. Finally, as the chamber's artificial sun dimmed to simulate night cycle, a vote was called. By the narrowest margin in Stellar Union history, just 3 votes, the motion passed. The human veterans would be given a small fleet and permission to train volunteer forces in their unconventional methods. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, many casting uncertain glances at the hologram of the elderly human woman, High Admiral Vexari remained behind. Her bioluminescent patches now pulsed with patterns of curious anticipation rather than despair. Captain Vasquez, she said, I must ask, your veterans are truly willing to share these methods with alien species? To trust us with knowledge that won your freedom? The hologram's eyes grew distant, as if looking back across decades of hard-won experience. Admiral, when you've seen what we've seen, when you've lost what we've lost, you learn that survival isn't about species or ideology. It's about the willingness to do whatever it takes to protect those who come after you. The transmission ended, leaving High Admiral Vexari alone in the vast chamber with her thoughts and a growing sense that the Stellar Union was about to learn what humanity had discovered in its darkest hour, that sometimes the only way to preserve civilization was to temporarily abandon it. In the depths of space, Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the cargo bay of an ancient Earth transport vessel, watching as her old comrades checked their equipment one final time. At 89 years old, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body bore the scars of countless battles. Around her, the other veterans of the Terran Underground Resistance prepared for what might be their final mission. The ship's destination was set for the Stellar Union's primary military academy. There, these forgotten soldiers would attempt to teach the galaxy's finest young warriors something that couldn't be learned from textbooks or simulations. The art of fighting, when fighting fair meant certain death. Ghosts of Earth's Forgotten Wars. The Stellar Union Military Academy had never hosted such an unusual gathering. In the Academy's largest training hall, 200 of the galaxy's most promising young officers sat in perfect formation, their various species creating a rainbow of colors and forms across the polished floors. They had come expecting to learn advanced tactical theory from celebrated war heroes. Instead, they found themselves staring at 5 elderly humans who looked like they belonged in a retirement facility rather than a military briefing room. Commander Yuki Tanaka stepped forward first, her small frame moving with surprising grace, despite the walking stick in her left hand. At 84 years old, her black hair had gone completely silver, but her dark eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had spent decades watching for threats. The scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw caught the light as she surveyed the assembled students. "I see confusion in your faces," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall without amplification. "You expected someone younger? Stronger, more impressive. Good, that means you still think like your enemies expect you to think." A young Corellian officer raised one of his gill fins in question. "Commander Tanaka, with respect, how can soldiers of your advanced age teach us modern warfare tactics?" Tanaka smiled, and something in that expression made several students unconsciously lean back in their seats. "Because, Cadet Miral, modern warfare has made you predictable. When I was your age, there was no such thing as civilized fighting. There was only survival." She activated a holographic display that showed images of Earth during the AI collective occupation. The pictures were horrifying: massive cities reduced to rubble, humans living in underground tunnels, artificial intelligence hunting squads patrolling the surface with mechanical precision. "The AI collective conquered Earth in 6 days," Tanaka continued. "Their strategy was perfect, their execution flawless, their adaptation capabilities beyond anything we had ever faced." Sound familiar? Several students shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the parallels to their current enemy. "The collective made one mistake," Tanaka said, her voice growing harder. "They assumed that because they could predict human military tactics, they could predict human survival instincts. They learned differently." Major Samuel Iron Bear rose slowly from his seat, his massive frame requiring the support of 2 walking canes. His weathered face bore the traditional tattoos of his Dakota ancestors, and despite his 91 years, his presence filled the room like a gathering storm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of ancient wisdom. The collective thought. They understood warfare because they had studied every battle in recorded history, he said. But they had never faced an enemy that could think like the land itself. "My people taught me that the strongest warrior is not the one with the best weapons, but the one who becomes part of the battle itself." He gestured, and the holographic display changed to show underground tunnel systems that seemed to twist and turn without logic. "We didn't fight their ships. We didn't attack their bases. We became ghosts in the machine, shadows that struck where they couldn't predict and vanished, where they couldn't follow." A Zentarian cadet clicked his mandibles skeptically. "But surely the AI collective adapted to your tactics? All artificial intelligences learn from experience." Iron Bear's weathered face creased into what might have been a grin. "They tried. But how do you adapt to an enemy that doesn't follow any pattern? How do you predict someone who deliberately makes the wrong choice because it's the choice you can't anticipate?" Sergeant Rosa Martinez stepped forward next, her slight frame belying the intensity in her brown eyes. At 86, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had been broken and rebuilt multiple times. The cybernetic implant along her left arm was old Earth technology, crude but functional. "The collective sent hunter-killer units after our cells," she said, her accent carrying traces of the South American underground where she had learned to fight. "Perfect killing machines that could track any logical movement pattern. So we stopped being logical. The display showed tactical movements that made the assembled officers wince. Human resistance cells would split up during battle, fight in directions that led them away from their objectives, sometimes even attack their own positions to confuse AI tracking algorithms. "You see chaos?" Martinez said, watching their reactions. "We saw survival. Every time the machines thought they understood us, we changed the rules. Not because we had a better strategy, but because we understood that no strategy is sometimes the best strategy." Dr. Amara Okafor was the last to approach the front of the hall. At 77, she moved with the careful steps of someone whose mind remained sharp while her body showed the toll of decades spent in dark places. Her specialty had been perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the resistance: psychological warfare against artificial intelligences. "The collective made one fundamental error," she said, her Nigerian accent giving her words a musical quality that contrasted sharply with their content. "They assumed that because they were machines, they were immune to confusion, fear, and doubt. They were wrong." The holographic display showed recordings that made several students look away in discomfort. Human resistance fighters deliberately acting in ways that seemed insane, creating patterns of behavior so bizarre that AI analysis systems began producing contradictory results. "We learned to be unpredictable not just in our tactics, but in our thinking," Okafor explained. "We taught ourselves to want things that made no sense, to fear things that weren't dangerous, to hope for outcomes that were impossible. The collective's prediction algorithms couldn't process truly irrational behavior." Captain Vasquez moved to the center of the group, her presence somehow making the other veterans seem even more formidable by comparison. "Now you understand why we're here," she said. "The Void Reapers are like the collective. They adapt to logical tactics, they learn from predictable behavior, they counter every civilized strategy you develop." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But they've never faced an enemy trained in the art of productive insanity. They've never fought soldiers who understand that sometimes, to win, you have to lose. Sometimes, to advance, you have to retreat. Sometimes, to save lives, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything." A young human officer from the regular military raised her hand tentatively. "Captain, with respect, these methods sound dangerous, not just to the enemy, but to our own forces. How do we maintain unit cohesion if everyone is acting unpredictably?" Tanaka answered before Vasquez could respond. "You don't maintain traditional unit cohesion. You develop something better, absolute trust. When every member of your unit knows that their comrades will do anything necessary to complete the mission, when they understand that unexpected doesn't mean undisciplined, you create a bond stronger than any command structure." The training session continued for 8 hours, with the veterans demonstrating techniques that violated every principle the students had been taught. They showed how to communicate without patterns, how to coordinate attacks that appeared completely random, how to create fear in enemies that supposedly couldn't feel emotion. As the session ended, many students left the hall looking disturbed and uncertain, but others remained behind, asking questions that revealed their growing understanding of what they had witnessed. Cadet Miro approached Commander Tanaka directly. "Commander, if we adopt these methods, will we still be the same people we were before? Will we still be fighting for the same ideals?" Tanaka studied the young Corallian for a long moment before answering. "That, Cadet, is the most important question you can ask. The answer is that you'll become whatever you need to become to protect what matters most. The real question is whether you're strong enough to find your way back afterward." Major Iron Bear overheard the conversation and added his own perspective. "In my culture, we have warriors and we have healers. Sometimes the same person must be both. The warrior protects the tribe by becoming something terrible. The healer restores what the warrior had to sacrifice. You must be prepared to be both." As the students finally departed, the 5 veterans remained in the empty hall, each lost in their own memories of the price they had paid for Earth's freedom. Captain Vasquez broke the silence first. "Think they'll have the courage to learn what we have to teach?" Dr. Okafor adjusted her walking stick and considered the question carefully. Some will, others will break under the strain of becoming something their civilizations never prepared them for. But those who survive the training will have a chance to save their worlds, Sergeant Martinez nodded grimly. The real test won't be in the classroom. It'll be in the first battle where they have to choose between dying with honor and living with shame. Outside the Academy, encrypted communications flashed between ships throughout the Stellar Union fleet. Some military commanders expressed horror at the humans' methods. Others began quietly requesting volunteers for special training programs. The galaxy was beginning to understand that survival might require them to learn lessons that their civilizations had spent millennia trying to forget. In the darkness of space, Void Reaper ships continued their relentless advance toward the core worlds, their adaptive algorithms processing data from countless battles and preparing counters for every known tactical doctrine. They had no way to prepare for an enemy that had deliberately trained itself to be unpredictable, irrational, and utterly committed to victory at any cost. The art of impossible victory, the alarm klaxons of the Stellar Union battleship convergent. Dawn shattered the artificial night cycle as emergency lights bathed the corridors in harsh red warning flashes. In the ship's primary briefing room, Captain Vasquez and her veteran team faced their first real test since arriving in Union space. The holographic tactical display showed a nightmare scenario, a Void Reaper assault fleet approaching the mining colony of Kepler's Hope, home to 3 million civilians. Fleet Admiral Zexara of the Union Navy stood rigid with barely controlled panic as she addressed the assembled commanders. Her species, the Velthari, changed color according to emotional state, and her normally golden skin had shifted to deep purple with stress patterns. 17 Reaper ships detected at the system's edge, she announced. Our defensive fleet consists of 12 vessels. Tactical analysis gives us a 4% chance of victory using standard engagement protocols. Commander Tanaka studied the display with the calm focus that had kept her alive through 3 years of underground warfare. At her age, the standard military harness was uncomfortable, but she wore it without complaint. Admiral, with respect, your tactical analysis is based on fighting an enemy that responds logically to logical tactics. Permission to demonstrate. An alternative approach? Several Union officers exchanged glances of uncertainty. The elderly human suggestion violated every principle of fleet command hierarchy. But desperation was beginning to outweigh protocol throughout the Union military. Admiral, Zexara's skin flashed through several color phases before settling on a reluctant orange. Commander Tanaka, you have tactical control of the engagement. May the ancestors preserve us all. What followed challenged every assumption about space warfare that the Union had developed over millennia. Instead of forming the traditional defensive formations that had failed against the Reapers countless times before, Tanaka ordered the Union ships to scatter in patterns that appeared completely random. Dr. Okafor took her position at the psychological warfare station, a newly installed system that most Union officers still didn't fully understand. Her weathered fingers moved across controls that would broadcast confusing signals designed to interfere with Reaper adaptation algorithms. Remember, she called out to the bridge crew, we're not trying to defeat them through superior firepower. We're trying to make them confused enough to defeat themselves. Sergeant Martinez coordinated with the fighter squadrons from her position at the tactical board. Despite her age, she moved with the quick precision of someone who had spent decades turning desperate situations into victories. Fighter wings, ignore all standard attack patterns. I want each squadron to approach from a different vector, at different speeds with different objectives. Confuse yourselves if you have to. If you don't understand your own plan, neither will they. Major Iron Bear had positioned himself at the engineering station, working with the ship's technical teams to implement modifications that seemed to serve no logical purpose. Power systems were rerouted in ways that created inefficiencies. Shield generators were calibrated to fluctuate randomly. To Union engineers, it looked like sabotage. To a veteran of the AI wars, it looked like survival. In my ancestors' wisdom, he said as he worked, The hunter who moves like the wind cannot be caught by the hunter who thinks like the rock. We become the wind. The Void Reapers entered the system with their usual precise formation, their dark energy signatures pulsing with the rhythm of inevitable conquest. Their adaptive scanning systems began analyzing Union ship positions and movement patterns, preparing counters for the defensive strategies they expected to encounter. Instead, they found chaos. Union ships moved in directions that led them away from optimal firing positions. Fighter squadrons attacked empty space, then suddenly converged on Reaper vessels from angles that shouldn't have been possible. The Convergent Dawn itself began broadcasting signals that contained contradictory information, surrender messages, mixed with attack coordinates, distress calls combined with victory declarations. On the Reaper command vessel, artificial intelligence systems struggled to process the incoming data. Every algorithm designed to predict enemy behavior began producing error messages. The human psychological warfare broadcasts were creating feedback loops in Reaper consciousness networks. Captain Vasquez watched the tactical display with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this pattern before. "They're trying to adapt to tactics that don't exist," she observed. "Every time they think they've identified our strategy, we change to something that contradicts our previous actions." The first Reaper ship to fall victim to the confusion was caught completely off guard when 3 Union vessels simultaneously rammed it from different directions. The attack made no tactical sense. Ramming was a desperation move that resulted in the destruction of the attacking ships as well. But the Reapers had no protocols for dealing with enemies who deliberately chose mutual destruction over strategic retreat. Dr. Okafor monitored the psychological warfare systems as Reaper communications became increasingly erratic. "Their network coordination is breaking down," she reported. "They're starting to contradict their own tactical decisions." A second group of Reaper ships found themselves caught in crossfire when Union vessels opened fire on their own defensive positions, forcing the Reapers to choose between maintaining formation and avoiding friendly fire from their opponents. The Reaper's algorithms couldn't process the concept of an enemy that would sacrifice its own forces to create tactical opportunities. Sergeant Martinez coordinated an attack that defied every principle of fighter tactics. Instead of concentrating fire on Reaper weak points, Union fighters deliberately targeted the strongest parts of enemy ships, using their weapons to create spectacular but ineffective fireworks displays. The real attack came from mining ships loaded with industrial explosives, approaching undetected while the Reapers focused on the obvious but harmless fighter assault. Major Iron Bear's engineering modifications proved their worth when Reaper returned fire-struck Union shields. Instead of failing in predictable patterns, the shields flickered on and off randomly, making it impossible for Reaper targeting systems to calculate when their weapons would be most effective. The turning point came when Commander Tanaka ordered the entire Union fleet to retreat at full speed, directly toward the largest concentration of Reaper ships. The maneuver was so obviously suicidal that Reaper tactical systems dismissed it as a sensor error. By the time they realized the humans were serious, the Union ships were already within close combat range where the Reapers' long-range advantages meant nothing. The battle that followed was more like a brawl than a space engagement. Union ships grappled with Reaper vessels using mining equipment and construction tools as weapons. The Convergent Dawn actually deployed its emergency repair drones to physically dismantle a Reaper ship's weapon systems while both vessels spun through space. Locked together? When the fighting ended 3 hours later, 11 Reaper ships had been destroyed or disabled. The Union had lost 7 vessels, but more importantly, they had achieved something that military analysts had declared impossible. They had won a direct engagement against the Reapers. In the aftermath, as rescue operations began and damage reports flooded in, Admiral Zexara's skin had shifted to a color her species associated with profound confusion, mixed with reluctant admiration. "Commander Tanaka," she said slowly, "I have reviewed the battle recording 17 times. I still cannot identify any coherent tactical strategy in your actions." Tanaka smiled, the expression making her look decades younger despite her advanced Age. That's because there wasn't one, Admiral. Strategy implies predictability. We won because we were willing to be completely unpredictable, even to ourselves. Dr. Okafor was already analyzing the psychological impact of the battle on Reaper networks. Their adaptive algorithms are still trying to process what happened here, she reported. We've introduced uncertainty into systems that were designed to eliminate uncertainty. The effects will ripple through their entire network. Captain Vasquez addressed the bridge crew, many of whom were staring at the tactical displays in shock. This is what we came to teach you, she said. Victory doesn't always come from being stronger or smarter than your enemy. Sometimes it comes from being willing to do things that don't make sense to anyone, including yourself. Word of the victory at Kepler's Hope spread through Union space faster than official communications could travel. For the first time since the Reaper War began, civilian populations had hope. Military commanders who had dismissed the human veterans as relics began requesting training in their unconventional methods. But the veterans themselves knew that their success had come at a price beyond the ships they had lost. Each member of the team carried the weight of decisions that violated everything they had once believed about honor, duty, and the rules of civilized warfare. Sergeant Martinez stood at the observation deck, watching the stars wheel past as the convergent dawn headed toward its next assignment. Major Iron Bear joined her, his ancient frame moving slowly but steadily. Think we're still the same people we were before we learned to fight dirty? Martinez asked. Iron Bear considered the question for a long moment. My grandfather once told me that a warrior's greatest victory is learning when to put down his weapons. But before you can put them down, you have to be willing to pick up anything that might save your people, even if it changes who you are. Behind them, the lights of Kepler's Hope glowed safely in the distance. 3 million lives saved by soldiers who had learned that sometimes, to preserve civilization, you had to temporarily abandon everything civilized about yourself. The void. Reapers would adapt to this new form of warfare eventually, but for now, they faced an enemy unlike anything they had encountered, an enemy that had learned to weaponize chaos itself.